So I want to begin with a quote, and this is a quote from Robert Solow, the Nobel-winning economist. And I like this quote not only because it's held true since 1987, but also because it's a double entendre. It tells us both that when you're trying to measure the impact of digitization, sometimes the numbers don't track the impact that technology is having. But also, sometimes systems don't automatically create the impact that we think they might have. So as we roll out systems like DPI, we ought to think about, if we want to know that we are doing good, we have to show our work. So we're gonna, we have a set of panelists here that represent different kind of parts of the research ecosystem. So I'm not sure if you can see the sort of spectrum that we've brought together here, but as you see on this bottom line, there are different forms of research, ranging from more policy report kind of focused research to more rigorous, maybe academic research. And we'll hear from participants or panelists across this whole domain. And the point that I would say that's important to recognize is that research should be responding to various needs. Sometimes we need quick, rapid evidence to understand how our deployment is going. Other times we need kind of more long-term longitudinal studies that demonstrate the impact of systems in a highly rigorous, peer-reviewed way. And so, I think all of the presentations that you're going to hear today demonstrate the complementarity of these various forms of research, some that can be synthesized for policymakers, others that are more academic. So we're going to hear from two groups that focus sort of on that right side of the spectrum, JPAL and Oxford. We're also going to hear from groups on the sort of more policy-focused and implementation support, that's ICER and Dahlberg. And then we're going to hear also from groups in the middle, like the Global Development Network, that sort of do quasi-experimental design, as well as the World Bank that does virtually all of this. Yeah, we're really excited to sort of share the work that these groups are doing. But I think what's important to recognize, and we met yesterday and all agreed that particularly if you think about this in terms of the value per dollar, the utility of these various methods is all kind of equal, right? There are some opportunities where policy research is super important to share with governments. There are also needs to have more rigorous research to really show and demonstrate the value of these systems. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to our panelists. Yeah, let's get going. So we're going to start with Christian Meyer from Oxford. Christian, we'd love to kick off with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Should I come there? Should I stay here?
Either way. Yeah, you can come if you want. Would you prefer, or do you want to stay?
I can sit. I can sit.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for coming. It's great to see so many of you interested in this. My name is Christian Meyer. I'm a researcher. I'm an academic at the University of Oxford. And we're mostly here wearing the hat of the Oxford Digital Public Infrastructure Research Lab, OxDPI. We're a small lab at the University of Oxford, at the Blavatnik School of Government. This is work that I'm doing together with my wonderful colleague and friend, Professor Stefan Durkon. And it really builds on some of the previous efforts that we've had in Oxford, including the Digital Pathways Commission, that have been thinking about digital transformation in low and middle income countries. We see our role as sort of serving the ecosystem as an independent convener for rigorous policy-relevant evidence on DPI rollout in countries. We've had strong research collaborations with many countries that are rolling out DPI, including foundational ID systems. And we have an additional focus on working in Ethiopia with our dear friends and colleagues from the NIDP program that is rolling out FIDA. Our focus is on cause and effect questions, right? On causal identification, where we're trying to attribute the difference that DPI makes to real-world outcomes in countries. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, a quick spotlight on one of the things that we've done with the support of co-develop and with our wonderful friends at the World Bank at ID4D and our friends at the Ethiopian National ID Program, NIDP. To give you a little bit of context, Ethiopia is a country of 110 million people that is rolling out a MOSIP-based digital ID system. It's called FIDA. By 2026, it's a very, very ambitious rollout. They've already done a fantastic initial stage and they're now really going to scale that up. What we're doing is essentially two buckets of work. One is to really think about the rollout itself and think about how does this work? Is it inclusive? Does it meet everyone's needs? And then second, and this is the bigger bucket of work, is to think about evaluating the impacts for three specific use cases on social protection, financial sector, and refugee integration. So what does this mean? For example, in social protection, you're going to integrate FIDA, the digital ID, with the flagship social protection programs of the countries. And obviously what this will do is it will make the benefits payments sort of linked to FIDA. And so you'll probably receive a reduction in leakage. And there's obvious questions as to what that does to household welfare, but also sort of from a fiscal side. For refugee integration, similarly, FIDA will replace, or FIDA will be integrated with the refugee ID, and so this has immediate impacts on the ability of forcibly displaced populations to access public services, health, education, etc., get work permits quicker. And we've had an initial kickoff meeting with over 100 stakeholders from government, development partners, academia, civil society, again with our wonderful friends at ID4D, where we brought a lot of researchers together with the government, with NIDP, sort of a bit of a matchmaking exercise, and have now focused on 10 research projects from mixed Ethiopian and international teams that we're going to try and push forward, where the bank and our group in Oxford are trying to sort of intermediate and trying to work with the government directly to make sure that we have the research designs in place and the data collection in place as public goods for all these research teams and any other research team that wants to come in. So we really see ourselves more as a public good provider to make sure that rigorous evidence can be generated over the next years. If you go to the next slide. And so, you're here because you probably want to learn about impact. So, I would encourage you to hit me up after in the coffee break, reach out. What we think we can offer to the ecosystem is independent, rigorous evidence and evaluation of specific in-country DPI deployments, thinking about development outcomes in these countries. We see ourselves as sort of a provider of, assistance, technical assistance with tailored research designs, evidence generation that are country aligned. All of our work is sort of deeply aligned with client countries. And I should say, because I am wearing the hat of an academic, we're trying to provide evidence in a timely way to improve policy, including during rollout and not just 6 years later. And perhaps most importantly, over the last 2-3 days, as I see there's a lot of demand, I think, for neutral, independent knowledge generation, evidence sharing. So we're happy to sort of be a neutral platform for stakeholders to come together. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Christian, and thanks for keeping it brief. We're now going to turn to our colleague at JPAL, Abdullahi, who's going to tell us about funding DPI research.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's okay. My name is Abdullahi, and I work at JPAL Africa, where I lead the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative. For background, JPAL is a global research center based at MIT with a regional office in Cape Town, and we work to ensure that policies and programs are informed by scientific evidence, primarily in the form of randomized control trials. The Digital Identification and Finance Initiative is JPAL Africa's research program that's focused on the impact of digital identification and payment reforms in sub-Saharan Africa. We work with governments, civil society organizations, NGOs, private sector actors to co-generate with them evidence on the impact of promising reforms that are in line with DGFI's thematic scope. It's generally supported by the Gates Foundation as well as the French Treasury. To date, we are supporting over 40 research projects all over the continent in around 16 countries. Some of these research are starting to yield output slowly. These are randomized control trials, so they do take a bit longer to generate results, but over the past year, we are starting to sort of recoup the results from the first wave of research that we have supported. A few highlights are on this page. I think I want to maybe highlight the Togo study that just came out but the research team worked with the government of Togo to essentially repurpose a technology platform that was initially designed to target customer for advertisement. And in the context of the COVID crisis, they were able to repurpose that same platform adding some AI tools to it in order to repurpose it to target vulnerable households during the COVID pandemic and use that to improve the targeting of emergency cash transfers. All of our research is public, and I'm happy to share links after this presentation. How can we work together? So essentially, we provide funding for research. We follow a stage approach to funding. We fund everything from a proposal development studies all the way to randomized evaluation, which are sort of the bread and butter of JPAL. We are anchored around a network of researchers that are based in universities all over the world, and our funding is typically allocated to those researchers, and we help match these researchers with program implementers that are interested in running impact evaluations. But beyond that, we also open up our funding to African scholars, so any researchers that is of an African nationality and based in an African institution can also apply for DGFI funds. And our added value as JPAL is this matchmaking support, essentially. So linking our network of researchers and program holders, and then facilitating the implementation of any impact evaluation by providing funding. The key considerations we look for when during this matchmaking process are a research question that is involved alignment with DGFI's thematic scope, the technical feasibility, and also an appropriateness of a randomized impact evaluation, because sometimes you don't want to do an RCT. It's one tool that is part of a larger toolkit, and so its use has to be quite deliberate. And in that way, we don't also guarantee a match with research in our network, because these typically depend on, yes, the feasibility of an RCT, but also an alignment between the researcher's interest and the program.
That's great. Thanks so much, Abdoulaye. And one thing that you're going to hear that's consistent across many of these projects is collaborations between local and international researchers. So I think that's a really important thing to highlight, and something that's going to be consistent. So we're now going to turn to Global Development Network, Jean-Louis. And this is an innovative model that we're going to be testing out and co-develop with the project to give GDN some support to go provide some technical assistance to local researchers. So Jean-Louis, over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. So my name is Jean-Louis Arcan. You can call me JL. So I'm the president of the Global Development Network. We're an international organization that was created by Joe Stiglitz in 1999, and over the past 25 years, we've supported more than 3,000 researchers in 140 countries, most of them in the global south. And just for full disclosure, I'm a recovering academic, unlike Christian here next to me, who's a full-fledged academic. And I also particularly appreciated Jordan's quote at the beginning, because when I was a graduate student doing my PhD at MIT, Solo was, I'd say, probably the best teacher in those days. So known to everyone as Uncle Bob. what are we doing on DPI? We'll move to the next slide. So this is a new space for us. But in general, what GDN does, the model that we try to construct everywhere, is this is demand driven. Okay, so it's stakeholders in the global South who have to decide upon also the research questions that interest them. And the way we structure this in terms of quality control is we normally have, and you'll see later in the next slide afterwards, not yet, we normally have an advisory board of people who are well known in the field who basically do quality control. But the whole point is not only that the researchers who carry out the research be from the country, but they actually decide the questions that get asked. And the spectrum that Jordan showed us is also, all of these approaches are complementary. That's the wonderful thing on this stage, is that we're all basically going for different parts of the distribution in terms of different needs. And what we're really looking at is trying to bridge this gap, especially between developing country researchers and the authorities and their governments. So one of the things that we quite often provide in most of our programs is training to help the researchers basically market their research, so that essentially the governments in these countries don't just, and I have nothing against Cambridge, Mass, and Abdoulaye knows this, and I love Senegal, but you don't have just people coming in from Cambridge, Mass, who decide what's going to be done. The whole idea is that the governments then are going to empower these researchers, because we believe that the local solutions, locally generated solutions, are going to be those that potentially work best. Now, this is hard to do. In a lot of contexts, you win some, you lose some, but thanks to the support from Co-Develop, and you can read all the stuff on the slide, that's why I'm not going to repeat what's on the slide. Let me just say a few words about what we're doing with Co-Develop. We can move to the next slide. So we're essentially looking at, we've identified 3 countries where we're doing a pilot, which are Bangladesh, Benin, and Ethiopia. So there's a nice overlap with Christian here in Ethiopia. Some of them are the same people, not all of them are the same people. And it's basically the researchers in these 3 countries who are right now identifying the issues related to DPI that they want to investigate. The methods will be different, right? We're not imposing a given method, but the whole idea is that this research then allows them to advise policymakers in their own countries. And that's the scientific committee, what you have on the screen for this project, and that's basically the way we always work. So I invite you to contact us wherever you're from, all welcome. And I mean, already, thanks to Co-Develop and this conference for bringing us all together, because in the prep meeting that we organized, we basically saw how much complementarity there is between every single person who's on this stage. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah. Thanks, Jean-Louis. This is fantastic. And I saw some phones coming out and taking pictures. We're going to have a follow-up forum. We really want to use this session to be spurring further conversation, not just us talking at you and going out into the world. So thank you so much. We're now going to turn to Peter at the World Bank, who's going to share a little bit about their experience. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you. So for us at the World Bank, the topics of measurement, research, evidence is of course at the core of what we do. And so much so that over the decades there have been efforts to kind of come up with a tagline for the World Bank, so that we're not just perceived as a financing institution, but as a knowledge bank, evidence bank, solutions bank. So I don't know where the current thinking of our internal senior leadership stands, but there have been efforts to kind of define the purpose of the World Bank around this realm beyond financing. And it's all driven by the core belief in what gets measured gets done principle. So similarly, in our identification, data payments, data sharing work, increasingly around the DPI agenda, of course, we subscribe to the core role of research, evidence gathering, data collection to inform the design and implementation of programs. We follow a theory of change in our DPI approach, both globally and in supporting individual countries. that starts with an identification of 5 core challenges that the work seeks to address. The first challenge is digitalization in silos that limits efficiencies, innovation, or ability to rapidly roll out impactful digital services. Second core challenge, poorly designed digital systems and policies that can compromise inclusion, that can harm individual rights and choice, create inefficiencies and data protection risks. The third are remaining gaps in ID ownership, digital identification for online services, account ownership, or usage of formal financial services. Fourth, limited data sharing capacity, either undersharing or putting personal data at risk. And the fifth is new technologies and use cases that need evidence building and adaptation to measure impact and their unintended consequences. So starting with this set of 5 challenges, we then go through a theory of change, a result chain of outputs, outcomes, direct, intermediate, and then ultimately, of course, impact. And we've designed our impact measures around some of the key stakeholders in the DPI ecosystem. For the private sector, the measure of impact that's of greatest interest in our programs is that the private sector innovates and improves service offerings, providing more accessible products and services thanks to increased competition, reduced costs, and reduced risks. For the government, the measure of impact is on improving efficiency, service quality, and innovation, through this increasing utility, transparency, and user-friendliness of government services. And last, for individuals, to of course improve welfare of individuals and households through improved and more accessible services, increased economic opportunities, and increased participation in the digital economy. Across all these impact indicators, we're of course overlaying them with the core principles of inclusion, with an emphasis on gender, disability, age of the users, their status also regarding whether they are refugees or internally displaced peoples, stateless populations. A core principle of data privacy, protection, safeguards, as well as user choice and empowerment. So this is just by way of framing, and then all these approaches, of course, are then manifested in our work at the global level, where we produce global public goods, and then at a country level, where we really deploy some of these approaches in depth. In terms of our global public goods contributions, you may be familiar with some of the global data sets, ID4D dataset, Findex, focused on financial systems payments, as well as Aspire, which is focused on social payments and social assistance. These 3 are the world's most comprehensive global data sets, country representative data for more than 180 countries. And these are the data sets that allow us then to aggregate some of the results around global findings, such as I was mentioning in my opening remarks a few days ago, globally there are still more than 850 million people without proof of legal identity. There are still more than 3 billion people who cannot verify and authenticate their identity online, thus unable to access services. Or that during COVID, countries with core digital systems in place were able to reach 3 times as many beneficiaries as countries without them. So these are aggregations at the global level, but because the data sets cover more than nearly 200 countries, we're able to get to more than 300 specific data points for each of the specific countries. Again, representative, and when it comes, for example, to ID ownership or digital ID ownership, this can also be disaggregated by the age of participants in the surveys, by sex, whether they are rural, urban, their status in the workforce, their income level, their education level. What we've been increasingly building in is also not just measures of access and ownership and kind of levels of enrollment, but also for those who do not have ID, what has this prevented them from doing, with an emphasis on receiving financial support from the government, obtaining a SIM card or a mobile phone service, participating in elections, applying for a job, or receiving medical services. So really unpacking some of the core social services that participants, that people are receiving from the governments increasing digitally, and linking them to ownership of foundational ID or digital ID. At a country level then, our approach is framed by the MEL framework, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. From a monitoring perspective, we are currently supporting more than 70 countries on their DPI journey, design, development, deployment, adaptation. Each of the projects has a standard core set of indicators where we, of course, start with a baseline, measure progress over time, and then have targets and analysis of progress towards those. Some of the most commonly applied indicators across the global portfolio of projects at the country level have to do with the number of entities using ID services for improved delivery of benefits and services, number of people using digitally enabled services, but also core measures of building trust and institutions, such as a proportion of population satisfied with services, proportion of complaints or grievances resolved successfully, or when it comes to ID systems themselves, is number of penetration tests conducted to prevent cyber attacks and loss of data. So this is what gets measured at a country level and then can be aggregated up across our entire portfolio of efforts. When it comes to evaluation, as the slide that frames today's entire panel lays out, it's a full suite of products, from qualitative to quantitative studies, process evaluations, as well as impact evaluations. Zooming in, for example, on the Philippines, which is one of the projects where we've been working for more than 5 years now, we've conducted a range of process evaluations to estimate time savings and cost savings of improved services. And these are savings to both the service providers as well as service beneficiaries. And this was done across a range of use cases: opening a bank account, obtaining municipal permits for starting a business, or obtaining an agricultural subsidy, and then from a social protection programs perspective, application and benefits validation. And across the board, we see estimates of time and cost savings up to 90% with improved DPI systems. We've published a research paper that's available online that provides more granular estimates.
Peter, I'm going to ask you to finish your remarks here. Yeah.
Perfect timing, because this takes me to my concluding points, which is, number one, data, research, and measurement is thus at the core of our activities. Number two, as we've seen, initiatives both at the global level, country level, and three, across these levels, deployment and design is conducted through partnerships with academia, with governments, with civil society organizations, but ultimately with people at the core as beneficiaries of the impact of DPI programs.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter. Great to hear all the work that World Bank does. Please continue this great work. And next, we're going to turn it over to one of those civil society groups. So we have Elizabeth Attori from ICER. And Elizabeth, we're really excited to hear about your work.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Maybe just to introduce ICER. ICER is an NGO in Uganda, and what we really want to do is to advance social and economic justice. We do advocacy at the national level, but our work does go up to the regional and also the international engagements with various mechanisms. So for us, policy engagement is at the core of our work, and what we want to be able to do is to influence policies, especially looking at those policies that would change the lives of people that are vulnerable. So that's how we are able to inform the work that we do around the research, especially the work that we are currently doing with the support of co-develop, looking at the digital ID system in Uganda and its impact and rallying civil society to be able to build their capacity to engage in such debates as one that we are having now. So critical for us is to build a body of knowledge that we then use in our work in advocacy. But the question is set, how do you build that body of knowledge? And for ISA, very specifically, and what is important for us is that we build that body of knowledge from the evidence that we are getting at the community level. So not necessarily a top-bottom approach, but really just going down to the communities and understanding what are the needs of the communities, what are the challenges that they are facing, and the research that we undertake is community-driven. So you'll see on your screen some of the research that we have undertaken, and that was a report that we did in partnership with NYU, with the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice. And that particular research was looking at the impact of the digital ID system in Uganda and the use of the digital ID system in health and social protection. And what we discovered by that research is a third of the adult Ugandans were being left out. And Jordan, you did say something when we were starting this, that numbers don't always track the impact. So for us, one thing that we always do is to go beyond the numbers, to understand what the numbers mean. So whilst, for example, we used government data in this research, which did state that 2/3 of the population had IDs, we asked ourselves the questions which were important for us in terms of inclusivity. What does this mean in terms of access? What does that mean if we are looking at gender and participation? What is the effect of 1/3 of adult Ugandans not being included in the system? And we started to dig deeper. If we are integrating our digital ID system with our social protection system, how are older persons able to get the about $5-10 that the government gives them every month? And so we discovered from our work, because one key thing that we hope to build even further is a community of advocates on the ground. We have community advocates that we train to document and to monitor the developments around the digital ID system, around the enrollment of some of these technologies within their community. And of course, that calls for building their capacity, because as we well know, communities aren't inherently able to know how to document, but we have set out to be able to do that. And from the data that we get from our communities, we then build this into knowledge products that we can be able to influence policy with. And oftentimes we ask ourselves, how can we best present what we are finding out? And sometimes it's not in the very big research reports. Sometimes it's presented in a photo essay where we highlight the lived experiences of these communities. So on the screen now, you'll see a photo essay that we did looking at the impact of digital ID systems on social protection, where we went further to interview some of the older persons across Uganda. And one thing that stood out for them is they don't qualify. And that brings us to the importance of measuring impact in the work that we are doing. And I like that this particular panel has brought a diverse stakeholders that are actually doing that. And for us, whilst we were doing our research, because as you know, civil society can't gather as much data as government, or for example, what the World Bank has. So we'll always benchmark off the government data, but look beyond the numbers, that are being presented, to be able to bring in place and to bring to reality the lived experiences of these people that should be the beneficiaries of these systems. So for us, the key building blocks for actually measuring impact is to prioritize the needs of the community, to be able to have a sort of consistent monitoring and evaluation of the ongoings that are happening within the community, and very importantly, for it to be policy focused. Research or the recommendations you get from research should be able to inform what government does or what we as civil society advocate for. So being able to bring that to the forefront is also very important for us, and yeah, we look forward to engaging with all the various actors. I think being able to also have a sort of multi-stakeholderism in measuring impact is key, because one thing that we have found in our work is if there are so many voices saying the same thing, then it's probably that thing is actually as it should be. So for example, if civil society says there is exclusionary impact and the World Bank is saying, oh, some people are being left out, that's something that we can be able to ask government to account for, or ask government to be able to rectify it within the system. And yet when it's just the civil society voice, then perhaps there are questions. Yeah, so it's great seeing everyone here, and we look forward to engaging with everyone.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and love the concept of a photo essay journal as evidence, right? Might not historically been thought of that way, but it's very valuable, and also I love the point on multi-stakeholderism and the various roles that the actors in the ecosystem play to bring together a safer and more inclusive DPI solution. So thank you so much. We're going to turn it over to Kunal with Dalberg, our last presentation, and then we're going to move. Ooh, we have a missing slide. We have, Kunal with Dalberg to take us home, and then we have a dialogue session where we're going to open this up and try to hear from you all. So Kunal, over to you for your work.
Thanks so much, Jordan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kunal. I'm a partner with Dalberg, and I lead our digital practice globally. Just a little word about Dalberg. We are a social impact focused advisory organization, and essentially we work with our partner organizations to help them think about the design of large-scale programs or small programs, impactful programs, help them with implementation of those programs, but most importantly, help them measure the impact of the work that they're doing. And that impact measurement can happen in very different ways. Digital inclusion is something that we've been putting a lot of our efforts towards over the last 2 decades. And of course, that becomes essential in the whole conversation of DPI. As governments are rolling out DPI, how do you even think about measuring the impact of DPI and enabled services on inclusion? And we've seen over the last 3 days that there's a lot of momentum that's been built around DPI. Countries are very proactively looking to implement DPI. But we do see a gap, along with co-develop, we do see a gap in how the tracking and measurement of inclusion happens within DPI. And that's what we really wanted to focus on. So what I want to just talk about in the next few minutes, and it's probably not going to take more than 5 minutes, is rather, I think, an ambitious approach on how to measure inclusion as DPI services are being rolled out in different countries. And this has been sort of a labor of love with, over the last 6 months, a lot of discussions, a lot of conversations on really thinking about an approach that's countries can make their own. So can we create some sort of a template that allows country governments to work very closely with CSO organizations like Elizabeth's organization to measure how inclusive DPI systems are, and then replicate it and then scale it across different countries in a very cost-effective manner and in a very timely manner. We are really exploring 2 types of exclusions within DPI, right? One is exclusion from the foundational DPI itself, which is access to ID. We've seen that a lot of people who don't have access to ID are then excluded from the different services. So that's the second level of exclusion. One is exclusion from the foundational DPI, the ID, and then exclusion from different types of services that are enabled by ID. And we've seen from our own research is that a lot of people who are left out of ID systems are obviously left out of the services that are enabled through these systems. And these communities tend to be minority communities, tend to be women, basically the vulnerable populations. And so the approach is to really think about how do you give them access, and how do you first of all measure what exclusion even looks like. So there are three things that we'll be measuring. Part A would be to measure the access of foundational DPI. Like I mentioned, do you have access to ID? But then why do you not have access to ID? Is it a challenge of process? Is it a challenge of documentation, or is it a problem of access to digitization? These types of things, right? And then, or is it a challenge of awareness? That's what our survey really wants to measure. The second is the access around the services that are enabled by ID. Do you have access to government services or payment-enabled services, or other things, health information systems that are enabled by ID? And again, we'll try to understand why people are excluded. Is it awareness? Is it process? Is it other things? To go back and inform the governments. And number three is to try and measure who these people are, right? Really go deep into the demographics, the segments, the communities that are actually being impacted by DPI and the inclusion or exclusion of DPI. The way we have decided or at least thought through the scope or the approach is to do a longitudinal study, start with in-person surveys of specific communities within different countries, and through a survey-based questionnaire that will measure the three things that are on the left-hand side of this slide. And then to make it cost-effective, to be able to scale this, move that from an in-person to a telephonic survey or other forms of more cost-effective ways to survey the same people and understand if you've been excluded from the rollout of a particular DPI in a particular country, then 6 months down the line, what does that look like? Have the efforts that the government and the civil society made, have they actually impacted the exclusion on? So that's how we've approached it. We consider CSOs as really the center of this approach to take this study forward along with the governments. And there are few ways in which we plan to engage with CSOs. Number one is to, first of all, inform us, Dalberg and co-develop, to surface what exclusion challenges are in the specific countries in the communities. Help us reach out to those target audiences to sort of answer the questions of the survey. Potentially even support the analysis as we gather this information, and engage with governments. We want civil society organizations to really inform governments what inclusion looks like within their DPI rollouts, and then inform policy making and decision making from this survey.
Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate all the great presentations. And the point that sticks out in my mind is, as we're doing this research, it's valuable to have not just the researchers in this conversation and the civil society groups, but the entire ecosystem, implementers, governments, really understanding the value of this. So I would like to turn to a dialogue session. I know these panels have been a lot of talking at folks, and we want to make this as collaborative as possible. So we have a few minutes left. What I'm going to encourage our panelists to do is spread out through the tables. If there's anyone you particularly would like to engage with, I'd suggest you pull up a chair at their table, and people like Julia on the periphery, you're going to have to join one of the tables and get involved in the conversation. But we're going to have a follow-up form next that allows you to sort of follow up with anyone that you're really interested in talking to. But for now, we're going to turn it over to a dialogue. So I just have a few starter questions, which is essentially for folks to share how the projects they're working on are thinking about monitoring evaluation, and if any of the presentations actually kind of resonate with the needs that you have, or other needs that you have that were not captured here. So I'm going to turn it to the tables. We'll come back in about 10, 15 minutes, and thanks everyone for your attention, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Shall we?